Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, Ukrainian-American scholar, historian, philosopher. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Eye on Ukraine. And today I'd like to focus on the summit featuring Putin and Donald Trump, or as I call first person singular, for reasons I'll explicate shortly. I had no expectations that anything positive would come out of the summit. So I say that, we're saying maybe something. Trump finally realized that Putin's been buffaloing him for a long time, and he's going to come in with a firm hand. I had no expectation that anything favorable for Ukraine would come out of this, but I did. In some ways, Trump exceeded my expectations, at least in one way, uh, on the stupidity barometer. He showed himself to be even dumber than I thought he was. But that's my fault. I never should have expected anything whatsoever positive from him. I start by comparing the scenario between Trump and Putin. I look at it from Trump's perspective as a child playing with a toy. Imagine a young baby, infant playing with a toy, and someone comes along and introduces a newer, larger, and even more colorful toy. Immediately, you know what happens. The baby turns away from the toy with which he's playing and is preoccupied with gathering and getting the new toy and playing with that, right? As if he's never seen the old toy. Now, that's exactly what happened with Donald Trump in Alaska. I think it's easy to say. He traveled to Alaska. This was arranged by him. And in my estimation, it was arranged entirely, not because he had anything on the agenda to try to necessarily to try to accomplish. He was trying to run away, as he'd been trying to do unsuccessfully, from the Epstein scandal. And he figured at least for a week and a half or so with this summit meeting with Putin, people will stop talking about Epstein. And that has happened for about a week and a half. And I hope it doesn't quiet all this stuff because I think it's very clear that Trump is a child molester, that Trump is implicated. He's part of the Epstein files. He's bargaining for time. People turning their attention so that he doesn't have to deliver the files up to the general public, which he promised to do. Anyway, so when he traveled to Alaska, which for him was part of Russia, so I'm going to Russia, the focus was on an immediate ceasefire. And he threatened Putin with strong indirect economic sanctions, right? So, to tariff countries that were buying Russian oil and so forth with massive tariffs as an indirect inducement for them to stop buying Russian oil so that Russia wouldn't have any revenue to fund the war. Now, Putin is no fool. He cajoled him. When the two sat down and Putin was the first to speak, Putin began a speech with a reminder of the closeness. And he was responding both to the geographical closeness of the United States and Russia, Alaska and Kamchatka and so forth, and Bering Strait. Then he also turned to the potential for economic prosperity between Russia and the United States. Well, if there's going to be any economic prosperity, it's going to be in the distant future. I acknowledge Russia is a land rich in untapped resources, but they're principally untapped. And it would be there's practically no trade going on between the United States and Russia. So this prospect for mutual prosperity is another ruse of Putin to get Trump's mind on economic things, to get his mind focused on money and not on injustice, right? So what Putin did, and this should come as no surprise by now, he appealed to Trump's prodigious narcissism. Right? He appealed to our U.S.'s first person singular. I use that language. Come on, Jeff. I use that language. Here's my buddy, Jeff. That's the only pronoun. I'll say that because that's the only pronoun that Putin seems or Trump seems to know. The first person singular. I. And Putin rather cleverly said, the war would never have happened had you been president. And he would say later, that the election was rigged because of mail-in voting. And Trump would later say, well, you know, he said something very interesting, that the whole election was rigged because of mail-in voting, that I really am a three-term president. Right? So Putin, and I read from what Putin says, he goes, I do that in 2022 during the last contact with the previous administration, Biden. I tried to convince my previous American colleague it should not, the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities and accept it quite directly back then. That is a big mistake. Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, if he were the president back then there would be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and the President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact, and have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come and assume it better to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Now, he's appealing here to the business sense of Donald Trump, and Trump, as we know, is not a very good businessman. He claims to be the expert businessman, but the analysis of history's business dealing shows otherwise. A business person succeeds by a special attention to minutiae, to details, and Trump only has a sort of big picture perspective, which makes him not a very good businessman. So Trump begins. This is what Trump says in return. Thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on. Most of them would say a couple of big ones that we haven't quite yet gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. Profoundly tautological. There's no deal until there's a deal. What is that? The hell is that supposed to mean? Recognition in some small sense that nothing really got accomplished, but wants to say that the meeting, he will say later, the meeting was extraordinarily successful. Okay, and then Trump goes on to add, he's appealing here, obviously, to Trump's sense of the art of the deal. He said, we made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. He's on a first name basis. This guy is a child abductor. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian children dragged from their homes, stolen, brought to Russia to become young boys to become Russian soldiers, to wipe out the Ukrainian past, young girls, presumably, to bear children to Russian men so they can have Russian soldiers. He goes, we had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. He never tells us what that is. It made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all. We had put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax. But what was done was very criminal, but it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all the things that would like to have dealt with, but we've overall had a good chance when this is over. We'll have a good chance when this is over. What the hell any of that means, I don't know what the Russia hoax is. I guess is that the European nations of NATO are blaming Russia for all the crimes of Vladimir Putin, right? The guy is a war criminal. He's a murderer. He bombs civilians in cities, innocent people. He started the war. The brutality of the war when it first began was extraordinarily brutal, with the slaughter of civilians as Russian troops came in. And yet, this is the Russia hoax of which we're speaking. Putin's really not a bad guy. All we have to do is sit down and make a deal. How do you deal with a criminal? Let's sit down with Charles Manson and discuss, and of course you did a lot of bad things, but let's make a deal. Okay, so what happened is that Putin diverted Trump's attention from an immediate ceasefire, the old toy, with the prospect of a permanent end to the war, the new, shiny, colorful toy. This appealed to Trump's narcissism in the sense that he can win the Pulitzer Peace Prize. Okay, it's not just a ceasefire. We're after Donald, Putin is reminding him. It's cessation. It's surcease of the war. That's how you get the Pulitzer. That's implicit. So that certainly, of course, what Putin said certainly appealed to first person singular. So the meeting certainly failed in its perspective and its overall aim to get a ceasefire of the war, so we can start negotiations towards permanent, perpetual peace. But it wasn't seen as a failure to first person singular. It was no debacle. It was a triumph, right? Again, he wanted cessation of the war, surcease of the war. And if that were not to happen, if that should not happen, there would be consequences, right? Tariffs imposed upon any nations dealing economically with Russia. Um, Putin somehow skirted that, walked away without any worries about any kind of secondary sanctions imposed on Russia that would cripple their revenue. One walks away thinking, what the hell does Putin have on Trump? Uh, there's got to be something. If not, Trump is just completely an unquestioned dullard, complete imbecile. So when he talks to, and this is a matter perhaps for another day, he talks with in an interview a day after. He says, "I think the meeting was a 10 in that we got along great." He got along great with a convicted killer, with a criminal, right? With a universal criminal, with a murderer. And he says the meeting was great. We need to do a deal with this guy. Walks into another country, my Ukraine, kills numerous people, right? Has no concern for the fate of his own soldiers, takes their land, and then at the end of the day, there's the upshot of this whole thing is that there needs to be concessions. There needs to be a deal made with this war criminal, with this murderer, that Ukraine will have to focus on making certain concessions. Oh, and by the way, one of Putin's demands is that Russia be made the official language of Ukraine. Fat chance of that ever happening. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this show. Please share this and like, and I appreciate any and all comments, and I'll try to answer any and all comments that you have to the video. TTFN, and we'll do this at another time once again.